Welcome, Gareth Evans, to Screen Careers. You're an astute film director and a writer, and we would love to ask you a few questions about, explain to us what your role is on a film set to start with, Gareth.
My role is quite varied, obviously, because as a writer director, there are two different kind of disciplines. You know, in the writing process, obviously, it's the genesis of an idea. It's taken it from the seed all the way through to something that's been, you know, established and developed over time. It takes a while to get a script into shape, ready for filming. One of the things that obviously is a major part of that is getting people to read it and getting advice back on it, and taking on praise and criticisms, and understanding how to best shape your script, and not not take a blinkered view of ignoring what other people have to say. So I've been very blessed in terms of the work that I've been doing across in the UK, especially with working with Ed Talvan as my producer, and Aaron Tsakian out of XYZ Films, where I've had two people who have been very much sort of on the same wavelength of me in terms of what I've been trying to do on a creative level when it comes to script writing. And so their notes have always been very pointed but good, and an honest critique of what I'm doing. And as long as you kind of have an open mind and are willing to collaborate, then it can only be to the benefit of a script then. And that process, it's not simply a case of, okay, you get your script written and then once you've got the project financed, that's it. No, there's continued writing on this thing. You start realizing elements of production that need to feed into your script, whether it's a case of changing a location in order to make production a little bit easier for you, or whether it's doing read-throughs with the cast and identifying lines of dialogue that worked really well in your head but don't sound great when they come out of the mouths of the performers themselves. It's taking on board the world experience of those actors that you've hired for the role, so that they can bring something to the project themselves. I know that there's a certain type of character that I can maybe draw upon my own life experiences to write, but I can't do that for every single person across the show. So I kind of relish the opportunity in the writing process to be able to, bounce the scenes with cast when they come in for their readings, and be able to put more flesh on the bones and be able to take on board what they're doing in the readings, and make notes throughout that process, so I can then feed that back into the script. And I think the script kind of continues to evolve throughout that entire process. And you never know what's gonna happen throughout the production. So there might be issues when you're 3 to 4 weeks in the middle of a shoot, and then suddenly something changes and you have a better idea for something, or elements go against you, and then you need to change things. Like specifically on Apostle, we had to come up with a brand new ending for the film, because of we had a scheduling issue where we were meant to do a burn on the village, but weather conditions and other situations forced us away from doing it on the day we needed to do it. So there wasn't enough turnaround time for the art department to be able to prep a burnt village set. And so the whole ending came as a result of that. So it was very much sort of like, being able to stay focused on the story you're telling, stay focused on the characters that you're working with, keeping an eye on the evolution of that story as it's being executed on a day-to-day basis, and being able to come up with those solutions as well as you're on the fly. So it's a pretty involving process in terms of the writing. To talk very quickly about the directing side of things, obviously that's a whole other ballpark then as well. That's a whole other sort of skill set that will usually involve me, in the broadest terms possible, being surrounded by extremely talented people on the ground who are going to execute everything that's just in here. So a large part of it is communicating to every HOD and every cast member what you're hoping to see and experience on the screen, whether that's visuals and tone and sound and performance. And so all of those things have to be sort of like pegged away in your head. I tend to I tend to have a very clear image in my head of what I want the film to be like when, before we go in and start shooting. So every day, myself and Matt Flannery, my cinematographer, my director of photography, we go in every day with a very clear shot list of how we imagine that scene will play out, and that becomes the foundation for which we use to execute the film on a day-to-day basis and a scene-by-scene basis. But a large part of my responsibility as a director is basically being able to corral and manage the sort of the enthusiasm and the morale of the crew and the cast across each day. And when you have extremely talented people behind you, it makes your job a hell of a lot easier then.
And you do it very well, sir, having been on that co-face with you on a few occasions. Gareth, for a new entrant coming into and having interest in film directing and writing, what was your career path? How did it all begin for Gareth Evans?
Mine is quite unconventional. Because and it's in a weird way, I wouldn't say follow what I did, because I had a very unconventional sort of introduction to the industry. I started by going to university. I mean, all throughout my life, I knew I wanted to make films. So when I was a kid, I always, I wasn't the kid that wanted to have a car for my sort of like 18th birthday. I wanted a camcorder. I wanted to be able to go off and just shoot stuff, because I had a ton of images in my head, but no way of putting them out on screen. And you got to remember, like you, Lloyd, we're both of a generation that didn't have a camera in our pocket at all times. You know what I mean? We didn't have like a phone that could shoot 4K footage. And so, yeah, I was very keen to be able to get my hands on a camcorder so I could just put whatever was in my head then out onto the screen from an early age. I didn't get one until I was about 18. Then I went off to university. I went to University of Glamorgan and studied media technology there. And that gave me access to the camera equipment. It gave me access to the edit suites. So it was a lot of sort of obviously being taught by tutors, but then also teaching myself and just putting the hours in and just kind of going into the lab and getting access to the edit suites and doing random things. Like I would pick my favorite 5 films or something of that particular year, and then do a VHS to VHS trailer cut of the film. So I would learn editing that way. I would go off and shoot short films as much as I could. Interestingly, Matt Flannery, who's my DOP now, I mean, we met in university. He was my housemate in one of the years, and I knew that he was interested in writing, but also interested in photography. And it was one of those things where it was just like, oh, can you hold the camera for me while we do this? Da, 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 da. And that's how it sort of started. And then we went off and started making short films together. Not all short films that are ever going to see the light of day, but we went off and sort of like, cut our cloth. We sort of learned our craft that way. So I learned a lot from making short films. I learned a lot from the sort of the limitations, budgetary and time-wise, that came with that. Trying to squeeze a short film into a day on a weekend was insane and never really made sense to me. And then, after doing the media technology course, I ended up doing an MA in scriptwriting at Glamorgan University as well. So I did that part-time because I was working full-time at that moment. And yeah, it was just it was a great sort of like learning experience where I got to be around like-minded people who had an interest in film, television, radio, and music. And, it was a very good sort of like, creative mindset that was kind of feeding and influencing me then as I was sort of like learning the tricks and trade myself. After that, I kind of, went into full-time work, 9 to 5, stopped really thinking about film so much. And then I think then we ended up doing our self-funded feature. Myself and Matt Flannery were kind of reached a point when we were probably about 24, I think, to 25, when we was like, we need to make something. We got to do something. We used to enjoy making short films that we hadn't for a while. And so we went off and made our own self-funded feature film called Footsteps, which was a big, massive learning curve for me. I funded it it was super low budget, about $8,000, $9,000 for the whole thing. Shot on DV back then. And, we funded it by taking out a personal loan in the bank and saying, oh, I'm going to buy a car. I need 8 grand to buy a car and pay off some of my debt, whatever, and it just all went into the making of this film. Ridiculously, 2.5 grand of that went into buying the camera that we used making the film. About 400 or 500 quid went to Primark as we bought the costumes for the film. It was like skeletal crew, 4 or 5 of us, that was it. And but what it did do is that it made me realize, because I took my boss at Aken, Ellen Rees, who sadly is not with us anymore, but she was incredibly supportive of me when it came to knowing that I wanted to do film. And so she allowed me to take like a month or 2 off work so I could go off, prep and shoot, and then come back when I was about to start post-production and continue my full-time job. So she gave me that opportunity, that lifeline to go and do that. So we were filming the sequence at Cardiff train station, and it was like early in the morning. We'd been filming all night, and it was probably like about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and we had one more scene to go. And we were filming there underneath the bridge of Cardiff train station. And literally as we're filming, the rush hour traffic of people coming in to go to their offices was passing by as we were filming. And it was one of those moments, I remember it quite specifically, because I would have caught that train. I would have been getting off that train and then walking across the city to my office. But instead I was here, and I was shooting this film, and I was that's what I was working on, and it felt like, oh, this is like a career all of a sudden. Even though it wasn't a career, even though it was a 2-month break from work for a bit, but it just felt right. Everything about it felt right. And as a kid growing up, I mean, my access to the industry was so limited, and probably more from my own sort of like, naivety and probably a little bit of like trepidation about actually like, stepping out there and getting involved. To be honest, that was one thing that I did regret, was that I didn't kind of push myself enough. I didn't put myself out there enough in order to get part of the industry. And it was almost like I kind of expected it to come to me as opposed to me going into it. And so, a lot of my inspiration and things that made me think that I could do this and enjoy filmmaking came from, watching behind the scenes content on DVDs and listening to audio commentaries and listening to what filmmakers talked about their craft, about how they would put it together. There was like 2 really sort of like, one major sort of like documentary that really, made me want to become involved in film. And that was there was like an 85-minute sort of feature-length documentary about the making of Magnolia, the Paul Thomas Anderson film. And it was like, it covered the entire process from writing to execution to post-production to release. And so I'd never seen anything kind of like give me that kind of insight into what actually it took to make a film. And so there I was, and making my own little independent film on the streets of Cardiff, and thinking, oh my God, I don't want to do anything else. I don't really want to get back on that train again. I just want to be out on the streets doing this stuff. And so that was when I caught the bug, really, to be honest. It wasn't the short films, it was Footsteps. And it was a major learning curve. I had never done anything like it. And when I look back on it, I can see myself trying to learn the type of filmmaker I want to be and trying to figure out what my visual language is going to be. But yeah, that experience was huge. I mean, it was absolutely gigantic in terms of what it told me about where I wanted my life to go from then.
It sounds to me it's a great energy and passion within you to do your role and to write some wonderful projects and productions as well, which we have very much come across with Apostle and with Gangs of London recently, that you've created as a show as well, and some fantastic shows, as well as the film The Raid. I find that particularly an interesting journey in your life, The Raid. I wonder if you could touch upon that for our listeners today in regards of how all that came about for you.
I mean, this is the thing. It's like, it's weird because I lived it. It never felt weird. It never felt unusual. But as soon as I kind of like put it into like bullet points or look at it from another perspective, it is kind of weird. I mean, I went out to Indonesia. I got hired by a company in Indonesia that was like a friend of my wife's. So, very lucky and fortunate to have that as a link and a connection. But they were looking for a director to go over and shoot a documentary about Indonesian culture. And, and they knew I had an interest in martial arts. And I found out later on that the documentary was going to be about the Indonesian martial arts of pencak silat. And so, you know, I looked at it from the perspective of, well, you know, what have I got to lose? I should just go and do it. And it was like 6 months in Indonesia, and go out there and spend some time there, work there. Matt was interested, so, you know, I said, oh, Matt's my DP. And so the two of us went out there, and my wife was a production manager on that as well. And so we went out, and we kind of just, you know, we went out and shot this documentary for 6 months and traveled around Jakarta. And I never really thought much of it beyond that. I just thought, oh my God, this is a great singular opportunity. And what happened was is that when the documentary was when we were in the process of shooting the documentary, it wound up introducing me to a whole new side of the culture that I didn't know existed. I had always had an interest in martial arts films since I was a kid, but as a viewer, as an audience member, never ever contemplated whether I would actually make anything within that sort of genre, because it just didn't, it just wasn't the thing that happened for people in Hirvine, you know what I mean? And so when I did that documentary, then I met these incredibly talented martial arts practitioners. I learned a lot about the culture there. I fell in love with the culture and the philosophy behind it. I thought it was a beautiful martial art that hadn't been represented properly. And so my first, you know, what happened then was that after the documentary, I took a look and I was like, well, do we go back to Wales? No, do we go back and then I just swap back into another 9 to 5? Or do we make a stab at it? And then, you know, my wife's from Indonesia and she had family there. And I was like, do we just try and see what happens if I go out there and work within the industry? And so we went out there about 3 months after we'd come back. So like we came back to pack basically and move. And then, you know, I toiled away in the television company for a bit, wasn't loving the work there, wasn't really being used to my full potential. But I met some really important people, you know, people that would become really important to me in terms of what I wanted to set up out in Indonesia. I met producer Aryo Sagantoro, who worked for the TV company at the time. And then Dawana Rally, Anna, as we call her, who was also working at the TV company. And basically, they came on board then and became a major part of a company that I ended up setting up with my wife called Marantau Films. And the remit was to make films that would fit within the martial arts genre and specifically raise the profile of Pencak Silat. And, you know, one of our big takeaways from the documentary was, who's this guy Iko Weiss and why isn't he a star? Because the entire time we were shooting the documentary, our cameras kept focusing on him. We couldn't sort of like, you know, all of the footage was kept, you know, fixating upon him because he had such a natural screen presence and charisma. And he seemed to understand the movement of camera. He understood how the way he would move his body in relation to the camera would look best on screen. And so it was the start of a really long journey then of setting up our first movie, Marantau, which we shot out in Indonesia. And Marantau, I mean, like it was privately financed by people who out in Indonesia who wanted to see the culture of Silat being explored more. And, you know, that was a major learning curve for me because I had gone from, you know, my own self-financed independent feature film to a documentary, to suddenly a crew of 100 plus people and shooting on location for about 4 months while we shot Marantau, up against all the elements like the rainy season in Jakarta, which is brutal. And you know, and I had that, I'll be honest, like I was so naive. I had this mindset of however long it takes to shoot the previs is how long it takes to shoot the scene in real. And then realizing it's probably 1.5 times that, really. You know what I mean? And then, you know, get into day one of one of the fight scenes and being like, oh, we're supposed to be a lot further in than we are right now, and we're up against it. So that was a massive learning curve. Like, you know, I didn't know anything about lenses. I was just going up to Matt and saying, oh, give me this, give me that. And then once UNC had the, you know, him and Dimas, who was the other DP on the film, once they had, like, you know, swapped the lens around, I'd kind of like, you know, curiously saunter over to the camera and then just take a peek and be like, oh, okay, it's a 50, okay, it's an 85, and then learn my lenses that way. So that you know, thankfully I had Matt as a sort of as a conduit to hide the fact that I really didn't know what I was doing out there. And look, we learned as we progressed. You know, we made that film, and then The raid came along as an idea, and I was like, okay, let's just throw everything at the wall on this. And I think, Maranta was a massive learning curve for me. And then the raid kind of solidified a little bit of what it was I wanted to do. And I started to get a little bit more focused then in terms of the type of filmmaking that I was kind of, not to say good at, but the thing that felt more natural to me than other styles of filmmaking, if that makes sense. You start to find your own language, and you start to figure out where you can best apply yourself within this industry then. And so yeah, it's just been a journey from there. And then as a result of the raid, it kind of opened all the doors for me then. It just like it really did. But I think for myself and for everyone involved in it, it really did. It became this like weird little sort of like benchmark, and a film that somehow traveled as widely as it did. But we went into it making it, we were blind. We didn't really know what we had. We didn't know, you can't guess the sort of the audience reaction to anything. And it just felt like it came out of nowhere for us as much as it did for the people seeing it. But yeah.
What an amazing story, Gareth. And I have to admit, your truthfulness and your bravery within your works and within how you're talking to us today shines through like a massive torchlight on all that we've been able to discuss with you today. Just to close things up with you, Gareth, and bravery and truthfulness is, I would imagine, it should be some great tips for a new want to be a kind of director coming into film or high-end television, as much as a writer. And I'm sure you've had some pitfalls along the way, and you've had some wonderful, great moments as well along the way. Is there any kind of Gareth Evans tips and advice kind of recap version you could give our audience today listening in about how to keep going in this industry to perceive their dreams?
I think I think a large part of it is about perseverance. You know what I mean? I've always felt that. I feel like if you're really, there's lots of different ways you can get involved within the film industry. And a lot of the times, like when I think about it as a kid and stuff like that, there are so many different ways you can be involved within filmmaking without necessarily wanting to be a writer director either. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that you want to tell stories. It can mean lots of different things. The thing that's really fascinating about the film industry from an employment side of things is that you can bring almost any skill set to the table and find a position within the film industry that will suit you. So, you could have an interest in painting and then you could become a scenic artist. You can have an interest in carpentry and then become a builder on the set as part of the art department. If you're interested in sound recording, then obviously there are places for that, and makeup and hair and wardrobe and all these different things, which are kind of like, creatively, lots of many jigsaw pieces that make up the bigger picture of it. Accounts and finance, and if you're good at organizing things, then that's a definite bonus. You know what I mean? If you've got a mind for organizational skills, then you're going to be useful within the film industry. So it's not all about the sort of like, I have a story to tell. You know what I mean? That just happens to be the journey that I've gone on, and that's the version that got me into it. But I will say, like, just to speak personally to my own experience, I think when it comes to how you get in as a writer-director, it is going to be perseverance. And it also is going to be having the sort of the drive and the goal to stick with it, even though you're going to end up at certain points across your career sacrificing certain things along the way, whether that's a social life. Because I know for sure that when it comes to like a production on anything, from the moment that everyone's on board in pre-production until the moment that film is finished being shot, I'm not really seeing anyone other than family. I'm not really going out on the weekends to hang out. It's a very, very life-consuming work. Monday to Friday might be shooting, but Saturday to Sunday is making sure all the prep is ready for the next Monday into Friday. It's checking edits, it's checking dailies. It's not just the 10 hours or 12 hours that you do on set. It's the little edits that you want to preview, and the little tweaks to the script you want to make, or the little discussions you need to do in order to sort of make sure that you're putting out wherever fires are coming down your way. And so it is a life consuming sort of task when you're in pre-pro and production. Post-pro, you get a little bit of your life back then, because you're working within normal hours a little bit more then. And so you do get to retain that social life aspect of it, but it can be disruptive to your social life in a big way. So you have to be willing to make a little bit of that sacrifice if you're going to go into like writing, directing, for definite, 100%. But the rewards are there, and for me, it's like as much as there are little sacrifices along the way, the rewards are things like being at a film festival, watching the film play out to a crowd of people who are complete strangers to you. But then when it clicks and when it connects with them and they respond to what you've put up on screen, it doesn't matter if it's one people or the entire audience. It's just the most magical thing. It's just like it's an intangible feeling, really, where it's like, you know, you an idea that you had that, you know, was just you in a room at one point. Listen, I listen to a lot of music when I'm writing. It's like I might be listening to a piece of music and then have this idea, this image, or this visual, or this scene suddenly pops into my head, and then, you know, that thing will have gone from being just the seed of an idea onto the page, you know, into the hands of somebody who can finance it and believes in it, and then into the minds of an actor or a HOD that can realize it, you know, on a day when everyone got paid to work that day to create this and pretend to be someone else. And then, you know, then we spent months on post-production polishing everything and then presenting it to the world. All of that, the absurdity of what it is that we do is astonishing to me. And that kind of comes all the way back then to that one moment that somebody watches it, and then suddenly that little tiny idea, that little seed of a concept just perfectly clicked for someone. And that is a reward for me.
Gareth, I can't thank you enough for sharing your journey, your career journey thus far. As I say, we're only midway through, and there's a long, long way to go in your career. And we've so much to look forward to seeing the next productions that you bring to our screens. Thank you for sharing your truthfulness, your bravery, and your wonderful tips and advice for our audience today. Thank you very much. Diolch I ti, Gareth.
Diolch, Lloyd. Thank you.